At Christmas dinner, my sister smiled and said, "Mom and Dad said I can move into your place tomorrow." I took a slow sip of my drink and replied with a grin. "That's interesting. Those keys belong to someone else now." 5 weeks later. There are moments in life that just shatter everything you thought you knew. For me, it happened this past Christmas Eve when my sister, Sarah, delivered what she clearly thought was good news, but it turned out to be the final straw in a betrayal that ran deeper than I could have ever imagined. The silence that fell after her words felt heavier than the snow piling up outside our parents' Denver home. Sarah sat there, blonde hair gleaming under the warm glow of the Christmas tree, that practiced smile plastered on her face. "Mom and Dad said I could move into your place tomorrow since I lost my apartment," she chirped, reaching for another dinner roll like she was just commenting on the weather. I took a slow sip of my eggnog, feeling the cinnamon burn slightly as I processed her words. Then, I put down my glass, a smirk spreading across my face. "Well, funny thing about that, Sarah," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "The keys belong to someone else now." The room went absolutely dead quiet. The only sound was the soft crackle of logs in the fireplace. Sarah's fork clattered against her plate, her face draining of all color. My mom's mouth fell open, and my dad's eyebrows shot up towards his receding hairline. I could see the confusion, the anger, building in their expressions. But me? I felt nothing but a wave of pure, unadulterated relief washing over me. To understand how we got to that point, I need to back up about 5 weeks. See, Sarah hadn't just lost her apartment because of bad luck or rising rent. No, she'd been systematically stealing from me for 2 years straight, and I'd finally reached my limit. It started small, or at least what I thought was small. She'd asked to borrow $20 here, 50 there, always with some tear-jerking story about being between paychecks or an unexpected expense. Being the older brother, wanting to help family, I'd just hand over the cash without a second thought. My first mistake. But Sarah had bigger plans than small-time borrowing. While living rent-free in my parents' basement, she somehow got hold of my credit card information. I'm still not entirely sure how, but I suspect it happened during one of her visits to my house when I wasn't paying attention. She started with tiny purchases, coffee shops, grocery stores, gas stations. The amounts were clever, never enough to trigger fraud alerts, but steady enough to add up. When I finally caught on, after my credit card company called about unusual activity, I confronted her. Sarah broke down in tears, swearing it was a one-time mistake, that she'd been desperate and would pay everything back. She looked so genuinely remorseful that I believed her. That was my second mistake. I paid off the $600 balance and made her promise to never touch my cards again. 3 months later, I discovered she'd opened a new credit card in my name. This time, the damage was $3,000. When I confronted her again, she had a different story. She'd been trying to buy Christmas presents for the family, planning to surprise everyone by paying it all back with her tax refund. The tears were bigger this time, the apologies more dramatic. And my parents? They took her side, suggesting I was being too harsh on someone who was clearly struggling. I should have pressed charges then. I know that now. But family loyalty runs deep, and Sarah knew exactly how to work that angle. She'd always been the baby, the one who needed protecting, the one who deserved endless second chances. So I paid off the $3,000 and had a serious talk with my bank about fraud protection. The third time I caught her, the amount had jumped to $8,000. She'd not only maxed out another card she'd opened in my name, but she'd also forged one of my checks to herself. This time, when I confronted her, she didn't cry. She got angry. She accused me of being selfish, of not caring about family, of having more money than I knew what to do with while she struggled to make ends meet. According to Sarah, I owed her this help because I'd been the favorite, because I'd gotten the college education while she'd had to work, because life had been unfair to her in ways I couldn't understand. The worst part? My parents bought into her narrative completely. When I told them about the forged check, my dad actually suggested that maybe I should be more generous with family members in need. My mom wondered why I was keeping such a close track of my money, when Sarah was obviously going through a difficult time. They made me feel like the villain for wanting my own sister to stop stealing from me. But Sarah wasn't done. Over the next year, the thefts escalated dramatically. She opened a personal loan for $15,000 using my identity, complete with forged signatures and fake employment verification. She'd figured out how to intercept the mail, so I wouldn't see the statements until the loan was already in default. When I discovered that particular gem, she claimed she'd been planning to use the money to get her own place, to stop being a burden on the family. The money had actually gone toward a brand new car and a trip to Las Vegas with friends I'd never met. Each time I caught her, the amounts got bigger and her excuses got more elaborate. Each time, our parents defended her, insisting that family helps family and that I was being unreasonably harsh. They started calling me selfish, greedy, and heartless. According to them, I should be grateful to have a job that paid well enough to help my struggling sister get back on her feet. The absolute breaking point came 2 months ago. I discovered my grandmother's engagement ring was missing from my dresser. This wasn't just any piece of jewelry. Grandma Rose had specifically left it to me in her will because I was the first grandchild to get engaged, even though that engagement had ended years ago. The ring was worth about $12,000, but its sentimental value was priceless. It was a 2-carat diamond set in platinum, crafted in 1943 when my grandfather proposed before shipping out to the Pacific Theater. When I confronted Sarah about it, she didn't even try to deny it. She just shrugged and said it was just sitting there in my jewelry box, not being used for anything important. She'd sold it to a pawn shop downtown and used the money for another Las Vegas trip, this time with a new boyfriend I'd never heard of. According to Sarah, I was being sentimental about a piece of jewelry that was doing nobody any good collecting dust. That night, I sat in my kitchen, adding up all the damage. Between the credit cards, the forged checks, the personal loan, and the stolen ring, Sarah had cost me $37,000 over 2 years. But the financial loss wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was how my own parents had enabled her behavior, consistently taking her side and making me feel guilty for being upset about being robbed by my own sister. I made a decision that night that would change everything. I called my real estate agent and put my house on the market. I didn't tell anyone in my family what I was planning. For once, I was going to handle Sarah's behavior my way, without family interference or guilt trips about loyalty and forgiveness. The house sold faster than I expected, to a cash buyer who wanted a quick closing. Within 3 weeks, I'd signed all the paperwork and handed over the keys. I moved my belongings into a storage unit and started staying with a friend while I figured out my next steps. My plan was simple. When Sarah inevitably came around expecting another handout or another place to crash, she'd discover that I was no longer available to be her personal bank account. I had no idea that my parents had already promised her my house without bothering to ask me first. So, there we were, Christmas Eve. Sarah's voice cracked as she processed what I'd just said. What do you mean someone else owns the keys? You can't sell your house without telling family. We had an agreement. What agreement? I asked, cutting into my ham with deliberate calm. The agreement where you steal my identity and rack up debt in my name? Or the agreement where you sell my grandmother's ring without asking? I must have missed the part where I agreed to any of that. Dad slammed his hand down on the table, making the water glasses jump. Linus Robert Harrison, you will not speak to your sister that way in this house. She made some mistakes, but she's family, and family takes care of each other. I looked at him steadily. Family doesn't steal $37,000 from each other, Dad. Family doesn't forge checks and open fraudulent credit accounts. But apparently, your definition of family is different from mine. Mom's face had gone pale. $37,000? Linus, you're exaggerating. Sarah borrowed some money when she was struggling, but $37,000? That's ridiculous. Sarah's composure was cracking fast. The tears started to flow, but this time they looked different. Desperate, instead of manipulative. I can pay it back, Linus. I'm getting my real estate license, and I'll have steady income soon. You can't just abandon family when they need help the most. I pulled out my phone and opened the calculator app. Let's do some math, shall we? $600 on the first credit card, $3,000 on the second, $8,000 on the third, plus the forged check for $1,200, the personal loan for $15,000 that's now in collections, and Grandma's ring, which you sold for $12,000 according to the pawn shop receipt I found in your purse last month. That adds up to exactly $37,800. The room fell silent except for Sarah's sniffling. Mom and Dad exchanged glances that told me they were starting to realize the true scope of what had been happening under their roof. But Dad wasn't ready to give up. Even if those numbers are accurate, selling your house without telling us was vindictive and cruel. We're your parents, Linus. We raised you better than this. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You raised me to work hard, save money, and take care of myself. But you also raised Sarah to believe that other people's hard work belongs to her when she decides she needs it. So, I guess you succeeded at teaching both lessons. Sarah suddenly sat up straighter, her tears stopping as if someone had turned off a faucet. You know what, Linus? Fine. You want to be selfish and petty, that's your choice. But Mom and Dad are facing foreclosure because they've been helping me pay off the debts. They remortgaged this house to clean up the messes you're blaming me for. So if you want to watch your parents lose their home because you're too proud to help family, that's on you. The word foreclosure hit me like a punch to the gut. I looked at my parents, seeing the truth written in their faces. Dad's shoulders sagged, and Mom wouldn't meet my eyes. Is that true? I asked quietly. Dad nodded slowly. We took out a second mortgage 6 months ago. We thought if we helped Sarah get caught up on everything, she could start fresh, and everyone could move forward. The payments are more than we can handle on my retirement income. I felt the familiar weight of family guilt settling on my shoulders. But this time, something was different. Instead of caving to the pressure, I felt my resolve hardening. So, let me understand this correctly. Sarah steals almost $40,000 from me. You two mortgage your house to cover her debts instead of making her face consequences. And now I'm supposed to fix everything by letting her live in my house rent-free while she gets back on her feet. For the 100th time, Mom finally looked at me, her eyes pleading. She's your sister, Linus. She needs help, and you're the only one who can provide it now. I stood up from the table, feeling calmer than I'd felt in months. Here's the thing, Mom. I did help her. I helped her for 2 years straight while she robbed me blind. I helped her even when she stole Grandma's ring, which meant more to me than money ever could. I helped her while you both told me I was being selfish for wanting my own sister to stop committing crimes against me. Sarah stood up too, her desperation shifting into something uglier. You think you're so much better than everyone else, don't you? With your fancy software job and your nice house that you're apparently too good to share with family? Well, guess what, big brother? Mom and Dad know who really matters in this family. Dad's voice was steel when he spoke. Linus, you have until New Year's Day to figure out a solution for Sarah's housing situation. If you can't find it in your heart to help your sister when she needs it most, then you're no longer welcome in this house. Your mother and I are putting Sarah back in the will as the sole beneficiary. At least she understands what family loyalty means. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. I looked around the table at the 3 people who were supposed to love and support me unconditionally. Instead, I saw 2 enablers and 1 manipulator who had finally played their last card. Sarah wiped her eyes and managed a smile that looked more like a smirk. I always knew they loved me more, Linus. You were just too arrogant to see it. I picked up my coat from the back of my chair and headed toward the front door. Behind me, I could hear Mom calling my name and Dad telling me to come back and be reasonable. But I was done being reasonable with unreasonable people. As I reached for the doorknob, I turned back one last time. You know what the funny thing is? I really did sell the house 5 weeks ago, but I never said I was abandoning family. I just finally learned the difference between family and people who happen to share your DNA. I walked out into the cold December night, leaving behind the sound of Sarah's victory celebration and my parents' confused voices asking each other what I'd meant by that last comment. They'd find out soon enough. 20 minutes later, I pulled into the driveway of my old house on Maple Street. The Christmas lights I'd hung along the gutters were still twinkling, casting red and green patterns across the snow-covered lawn. But something was different. There were moving boxes stacked on the porch, and warm light glowed from every window. I used my key to open the front door, calling out as I stepped inside. Emma, you here? In the kitchen, came the reply that made my chest tighten with relief. Emma Chin stood at the kitchen island, wrapping coffee mugs in newspaper and placing them carefully in a box labeled Kitchen Essentials. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore the oversized sweater I'd bought her for her birthday last month. When she looked up and saw my face, her expression immediately shifted to concern. How bad was it? She asked, setting down the mug she'd been wrapping. I pulled her into my arms, breathing in the familiar scent of her vanilla shampoo. About as bad as we expected, maybe worse. They threatened to cut me out of the will and told me I'm not welcome in their house anymore. Emma pulled back to look at me. I'm sorry, Linus. I know you were hoping they'd finally see reason. Actually, I said, and realized I meant it. I'm relieved. For the first time in 2 years, I don't have to pretend that Sarah's behavior is normal or acceptable. I don't have to feel guilty for being upset about being robbed. I can just move forward. Emma smiled, the kind of smile that had made me fall in love with her all over again when she'd moved back from Portland 6 months ago. We dated for 3 years before she'd gotten a nursing practitioner job in Oregon. The breakup had been mutual but painful, both of us knowing that long-distance relationships rarely worked, but hoping we'd find our way back to each other someday. When Emma returned to Denver in June, she'd called me out of the blue to suggest coffee. She'd saved enough money from her Portland salary to make a down payment on a house, and she was looking for investment properties in neighborhoods she knew well. I'd mentioned my situation with Sarah during that first coffee meeting, and Emma had listened with the kind of focused attention that reminded me why I'd fallen for her in the first place. You know, she'd said after I'd finished explaining about the stolen money and my parents' enabling behavior, I've been looking for a house in your neighborhood. If you ever decide to sell, I'd be interested in making an offer. At first, I thought she was just being polite. But over the following weeks, as Sarah's thefts escalated and my family's pressure intensified, the idea started making more sense. Emma had always been practical about money and real estate. She understood investment potential, and she'd seen firsthand how beautiful my neighborhood was during the years we dated. When I discovered the missing engagement ring and finally decided I was done enabling Sarah's behavior, I'd called Emma to ask if her offer was still open. Not only was she still interested, but she was ready to make a cash offer that would allow for a quick closing. There's something else, she'd said during that phone call. I've been documenting everything you've told me about Sarah's financial crimes. I have a friend who works in financial investigations, and she thinks there might be grounds for criminal charges if you decide to go that route. I'd been skeptical at first. Sarah was manipulative and selfish, but a criminal? The idea seemed extreme until I really started thinking about the scope of what she'd done. Identity theft, check fraud, loan fraud. These weren't just family disputes. They were actual felonies. The documentation could be useful even if you never filed charges, Emma had explained. Sometimes people like Sarah only change their behavior when they realize there could be real consequences. Now, standing in what used to be my kitchen but was now Emma's, I felt a surge of gratitude for her practical approach to problem solving. While my family had been focused on emotions and guilt trips, Emma had been thinking strategically about solutions. Did you get everything documented from tonight? Emma asked, pulling me back to the present. I nodded. I recorded the whole conversation on my phone. Sarah admitted to taking the ring, and my parents confirmed they remortgaged their house to cover her debts. Plus, Dad explicitly threatened to disinherit me if I don't provide housing for Sarah. Emma raised an eyebrow. That last part could actually work in your favor legally. It establishes a pattern of family coercion around Sarah's financial crimes. There's something else, I said, remembering Sarah's final taunt. Sarah said she always knew our parents loved her more. I think she's been manipulating them for a lot longer than just the past 2 years. Emma moved to the refrigerator and pulled out 2 bottles of beer, handing one to me. Rachel wants to meet with you tomorrow if you're available. She's been running some preliminary background checks based on the information you provided, and she's found some interesting connections. Rachel Morrison was Emma's friend from nursing school who'd ended up working for the Colorado Bureau of Investigation in their financial crimes division. When Emma had first mentioned bringing in outside help, I'd been hesitant. Getting law enforcement involved felt like crossing a line from family dispute to criminal investigation. But Emma had made a compelling argument. Sarah isn't just hurting you anymore, Linus. If she's willing to steal almost $40,000 from her own brother, what's she doing to other people? What happens when she moves on to stealing from elderly relatives or strangers? Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is help them face real consequences before their behavior escalates further. I took a sip of beer and looked around the kitchen that had once been mine, but now felt more like home than it had in months. There's one more thing, I said, something I haven't told my family yet. Emma waited, patient as always. I love you, I said. I know we haven't officially talked about getting back together, but these past 6 months have reminded me why we worked so well before. You see solutions where other people see problems. You think about long-term consequences instead of short-term emotions. You make me feel like I'm not crazy for wanting to be treated with basic respect. Emma sat down her beer and stepped closer to me. I love you too, Linus. I never stopped loving you, even in Portland. But I needed to know I could build my own life before I tried to build one with someone else. And now, she smiled. Now I own a house in the neighborhood where I want to live. I have a career I'm passionate about. And I'm in love with a man who's finally learning to set healthy boundaries with toxic people. I'd say the timing is pretty good. I kissed her then, tasting the happiness I'd been missing for longer than I'd realized. When we broke apart, Emma rested her forehead against mine. There's something I need to tell you too, she said softly. Something that's going to make everything more complicated, but also more important. My heart stopped. What? Emma took my hands in hers. I'm pregnant, Linus. 8 weeks. I found out 3 days ago. The world seemed to stop spinning for a moment. Pregnant. Emma was pregnant with my child. A baby who would grow up in a world where I'd finally learned to stand up for myself and the people I loved. Are you okay with this? Emma asked, searching my face for clues about how I was feeling. I thought about my parents' house, where guilt and manipulation passed for love. I thought about Sarah's entitled behavior and my parents' enabling responses. Then I looked at Emma, who'd spent months helping me document crimes and build a case for justice instead of just telling me to forgive and forget. I'm more than okay with this, I said. I'm grateful. This baby is going to grow up understanding the difference between love and manipulation, between helping someone and enabling them, between family loyalty and family toxicity. Emma's smile lit up the whole kitchen. Good. Because Rachel's investigation is about to get a lot more interesting. And I have a feeling Sarah's crimes go deeper than just what she's done to you. The next morning, Emma and I met Rachel at a coffee shop downtown, away from any places where we might run into family members. Rachel Morrison looked exactly like what you'd expect from a financial crimes investigator. Sharp-eyed, well-organized, and completely focused on facts rather than emotions. Before we start, Rachel said, opening a laptop and pulling out a thick folder, I need to make sure you understand what you're potentially getting into. If we proceed with this investigation and find evidence of criminal activity, there's no going back. Family relationships that are already strained could be permanently damaged. I looked at Emma, who squeezed my hand encouragingly. I understand, I told Rachel. But I also understand that ignoring criminal behavior doesn't make it go away. It just makes it someone else's problem later. Rachel nodded approvingly. Good. Because what I've found in the past 24 hours suggests that Sarah's activities extend far beyond what she's done to you. She opened the laptop and turned it so Emma and I could see the screen. It showed a spreadsheet with names, dates, and dollar amounts that made my stomach drop. I ran Sarah's social security number through several databases, Rachel explained. She's been busy. In addition to the accounts she opened using your information, she's also opened credit cards and taken out loans using the identities of at least 4 other family members. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Who? Your Aunt Helen Richardson? Your cousin Derek Patterson? Someone named Thomas Harrison, who appears to be your uncle, and someone listed as Robert and Margaret Harrison, who I assume are your parents. The blood drained from my face. She stole from our parents too? But they mortgaged their house to help her pay off debts. Why would they need to do that if she was also stealing from them? Rachel scrolled down to show more entries. Because she's been very careful about how she's done it. The accounts she opened using your parents' information have different mailing addresses, so they wouldn't receive the statements. She's been making minimum payments on some accounts to keep them from going into collections immediately. But the balances are substantial. Emma leaned forward to read the numbers more clearly. How substantial are we talking about? Combined, across all 5 family members, we're looking at approximately $123,000 in fraudulent debt, Rachel said. But that's just what I can find through official channels. If she's also been taking cash or selling personal property like she did with your grandmother's ring, the actual amount could be significantly higher. I felt sick. And Helen is 74 years old and lives on Social Security. Uncle Thomas is a retired teacher. They can't afford this kind of debt. Which brings us to the next issue, Rachel continued. Sarah hasn't been working alone. The sophistication of some of these schemes suggests she's had help from someone who understands financial systems and identity verification processes. She clicked to another screen, showing bank records and credit applications. Look at the employment verification on this loan application. It lists Sarah as a manager at a construction company called Patterson Builders. The company exists, the phone number works, and when the bank called to verify employment, someone confirmed that Sarah worked there and provided salary information. But Sarah's never worked construction, I said. She's never had a job that lasted longer than 6 months. Exactly. Which means someone at Patterson Builders was willing to lie to a bank to help her commit loan fraud. I did some digging on the company ownership, and it's registered to a Tyler Patterson. Any chance you know who that is? Emma and I looked at each other blankly. But then I remembered something. Sarah mentioned going to Las Vegas with a new boyfriend I'd never heard of. She didn't give me his name, but if he owns a construction company, that could be how they met. She always liked guys with money. Rachel made a note on her legal pad. I'll need to do more research on Tyler Patterson and his company. But the preliminary information suggests he's been helping Sarah with identity theft and loan fraud for at least 6 months. The scope of what Rachel was describing felt overwhelming. So what you're saying is that my sister is basically running a criminal enterprise? I'm saying your sister has committed multiple felonies involving identity theft, wire fraud, and conspiracy, Rachel corrected. The federal sentencing guidelines for this type of crime typically range from 2 to 8 years in prison, depending on the total amount involved and the number of victims. 8 years in prison. The thought should have made me feel bad for Sarah, but instead, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time since this whole mess started, someone was talking about real consequences instead of family loyalty and second chances. What happens next? Emma asked. Rachel closed the laptop and leaned back in her chair. That depends on what you want to happen, Linus. I can continue investigating and potentially present findings to the U.S. Attorney's Office for federal prosecution, but I need to know that you're prepared to follow through with whatever we discover. I thought about Christmas dinner the night before, about Sarah's smug smile when she said our parents loved her more, about my father threatening to disinherit me for not providing housing for someone who'd been systematically robbing our entire family. I'm prepared, I said, but I want to make sure the other victims know what's been done to them before any arrests happen. If Aunt Helen and Cousin Derek are dealing with debt they don't understand, they deserve to know the truth. Rachel smiled for the first time since we'd sat down. I was hoping you'd say that, because I think your family is about to discover that Sarah's Christmas announcement was the least of their problems. She pulled a business card from her wallet and slid it across the table. If you're serious about this, I need you to file a formal complaint with the police today. Once we have an official case number, I can expand the investigation through proper channels. I picked up the card and looked at Emma. Are you sure you want to be involved in this? It's going to get messy, and with the baby coming. Emma reached over and took my hand. Linus, this isn't about revenge or punishment. This is about stopping someone who's hurting innocent people. Your Aunt Helen shouldn't have to worry about debt collectors calling because your sister stole her identity. Your cousin Derek shouldn't have his credit destroyed because he tried to help family. Sometimes protecting the people you love means holding the people who hurt them accountable. I squeezed her hand, feeling more grateful than ever that she'd come back into my life. Okay, let's do it. Rachel gathered her papers and closed the laptop. One more thing. Sarah's behavior pattern suggests she's escalating. People who commit financial crimes often increase the frequency and scope of their activities over time, especially when they've been getting away with it. If we don't stop her now, the next victims might be strangers, elderly people, or other vulnerable targets. The thought of Sarah preying on elderly strangers made my decision feel even more clear. This wasn't about family dynamics anymore. This was about preventing a predator from finding new victims. As we left the coffee shop, Emma stopped me on the sidewalk. How are you feeling about all of this? I looked up at the gray December sky, thinking about the conversation ahead with the police, the phone calls I'd need to make to warn other family members, and the inevitable confrontation when Sarah discovered her crimes were being investigated. Scared, I said honestly, but also relieved. For 2 years, I've been told I was overreacting, being selfish, not understanding how much Sarah was struggling. Now I find out I was actually underreacting. I was being stolen from, but so was everyone else in our family. Emma slipped her arm through mine as we walked toward the police station. Your baby is going to be proud of you someday for doing the right thing, even when it was difficult. Our baby. In 7 months, I'd be responsible for protecting and teaching a tiny person who would depend on me to model good decision-making and healthy boundaries. The thought terrified me and motivated me in equal measure. Let's go file that complaint, I said. 3 days after Christmas, my phone rang at 6 in the morning. The caller ID showed Mom, and for a split second, I considered letting it go to voicemail. But something about the early hour made me answer. Linus. Mom's voice was thick with tears and barely controlled panic. You need to come home right now? Something terrible has happened. My first thought was that Dad had had another heart episode. He'd been to the emergency room twice in the past year for chest pains that turned out to be stress-related, but we all worried about the real thing happening eventually. Is Dad okay? I asked, already reaching for my clothes. It's Sarah, Mom sobbed. She's gone, Linus. She took everything and disappeared. I sat down hard on the edge of my bed, trying to process what I was hearing. What do you mean she took everything? She emptied our checking account, our savings account. She took my jewelry box, including my mother's pearls and my wedding ring. And she left a note saying it was our fault for never believing in her dreams. The irony was so thick I almost choked on it. Sarah had been stealing from my parents for months while they defended her behavior to me, and now she'd graduated to robbing them directly. How much money are we talking about, Mom? $43,000, she whispered. Everything we had left after the second mortgage. Everything we were counting on for Dad's medical bills and the house payments. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of family crisis settling on my shoulders, even though I tried to distance myself from it. Where is she now? We don't know. Her room is empty. Her car is gone. She didn't answer her phone all yesterday, so we went to check on her this morning and found the note. Mom's voice broke completely. Your father is in the hospital, Linus. The stress gave him chest pains again, but this time they're keeping him for observation. Guilt hit me like a physical blow. Whatever Sarah had done, Dad was still my father, and he was in the hospital partially because of stress I could have helped prevent. Which hospital? Presbyterian St. Joseph. He's in the cardiac unit. Mom took a shaky breath. Linus, I know we said some terrible things on Christmas. I know you're angry with us, but we need your help. I don't know what to do. 20 minutes later, I was driving toward the hospital with Emma in the passenger seat. She'd insisted on coming, partly for moral support and partly because she wanted to see my father's condition for herself. You know this doesn't change anything about pressing charges against Sarah, right? Emma said gently as we pulled into the hospital parking garage. I know, I said. If anything, this proves that Rachel was right about her escalating behavior. Taking money directly from our parents' accounts isn't desperation anymore. It's calculated theft. We found Mom in the cardiac unit waiting room, looking older than I'd ever seen her. Her gray hair was uncombed, she wasn't wearing makeup, and her clothes looked like she'd slept in them. When she saw us, she stood up and walked toward me with her arms outstretched. Thank you for coming, she said, hugging me tighter than she had in years. I know we don't deserve your help after what we said, but I didn't know who else to call. How is he? I asked. Stable. The doctor thinks it's another stress episode, but they want to run tests to make sure there wasn't any actual heart damage. Mom wiped her eyes with a tissue that looked like it had been used multiple times. Linus, we were wrong about Sarah. We've been wrong for a long time. Emma stepped forward and introduced herself politely. Mom looked confused for a moment, probably trying to remember if she'd met Emma before, but then recognition dawned. You're the nurse who used to date Linus. Mom said, I remember you from that barbecue a few years ago. Nurse practitioner now, Emma corrected gently. And we're back together. Mom looked between us, and I could see her trying to process this information along with everything else that was happening. Back together. Actually, Mom, there's something else we need to tell you. Emma's pregnant. You're going to be a grandmother. Under normal circumstances, this would have been happy news, worth celebrating. But given the timing and location, Mom just stared at us for a long moment before fresh tears started flowing. A grandchild, she said softly. Something good in the middle of all this mess. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text message. Then another. Then a third. I looked at the screen and felt my stomach drop. Who's texting you? Emma asked, noticing my expression. Aunt Helen, Cousin Derek, Uncle Thomas. I showed her the phone. They're all saying the same thing. Debt collectors are calling about accounts they didn't open. Mom looked stricken. What does that mean? I exchanged glances with Emma, who nodded slightly. It was time to tell Mom about the investigation, even though the timing couldn't have been worse. Mom, sit down. There's something you need to know about Sarah's activities. Over the next 20 minutes, I explained everything Rachel had discovered. The fraudulent accounts opened in multiple family members' names. The fake employment verification. The systematic pattern of identity theft that had been going on for months. Mom listened in stunned silence, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly just absorbing the scope of what Sarah had done to our family. So when she said she was struggling and needed help, Mom said slowly, "She was actually stealing from all of us the entire time?" "Not just stealing, Mom. She was committing federal crimes. Identity theft, wire fraud, conspiracy. The kind of crimes that carry prison sentences." Mom buried her face in her hands. "We enabled this. We told you to be more understanding, more generous, more forgiving. We made you feel guilty for being upset about being robbed, and the whole time she was robbing us too." "You couldn't have known," Emma said kindly. "People like Sarah are very good at manipulation. They know exactly how to exploit family loyalty and guilt to avoid consequences." My phone rang, and Uncle Thomas's name appeared on the screen. I answered immediately. "Linus, thank God," came his familiar voice. "I've been getting calls from collection agencies about a motorcycle loan for $22,000. I haven't bought a motorcycle since I was 25 years old. What the hell is going on?" "Uncle Thomas, where are you right now?" "At home." "Why?" "Don't sign anything, don't pay anything, and don't give any personal information to anyone who calls. We need to talk, but not over the phone. Can you meet us at Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital? Dad's in the cardiac unit, and we're dealing with a family emergency." "Jesus, is Robert okay?" "He will be, but there's something you need to know about Sarah." After I hung up, Emma squeezed my hand. "How many more family members do you think are affected?" "Based on what Rachel found, probably all of them. Sarah's had access to family gatherings, family addresses, family social security numbers. She could have been collecting information for months." Mom looked up from her hands. "I need to see the note she left." "What note?" "The one she left in her room. I was so upset this morning that I just grabbed it and stuffed it in my purse." Mom dug through her bag and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. "Maybe it will help you understand what she was thinking." I unfolded the paper and read Sarah's final message to our family. "I'm sorry it came to this, but you never believed in my dreams or understood how hard it is to start over when everyone expects you to fail. I try to make things work here, but Linus turned you against me and made it impossible for me to succeed. The money I took was for a fresh start, somewhere that people don't judge me for my mistakes. Don't try to find me. I need to build a life where I can be proud of myself instead of always disappointing everyone. Maybe someday you'll understand that I was just trying to survive in a family that never really accepted me. I love you all, but I can't keep living in Linus' shadow." I read the note twice, feeling a mixture of anger and sadness. Even in her final message, Sarah was positioning herself as the victim and me as the villain. She was taking $43,000 from our parents and calling it survival. She was abandoning a family in crisis and calling it personal growth. "She's not taking responsibility for anything," I said, handing the note to Emma. "Even now, she's blaming everyone else for her choices." Emma read the note and shook her head. "This actually helps your case, Linus. She's admitting to taking money and indicating that she's fleeing to avoid consequences. If Rachel can present this to a prosecutor, it shows consciousness of guilt." My phone buzzed again. This time it was Cousin Derek calling. "Linus, I need help. I'm getting calls about a credit card with an $8,000 balance that I never applied for. The collection agency says they're going to garnish my wages if I don't pay immediately." "Derek, don't pay anything. We're at Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital dealing with a family emergency, but we need to talk to you about Sarah. Can you come here?" "Sarah? What does Sarah have to do with credit cards in my name?" "Everything. I'll explain when you get here." As I hung up, Mom looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It was a mixture of shame, determination, and something that might have been respect. "What do we do now?" she asked. I looked at Emma, who gave me an encouraging nod. "Now, we call the police and file formal complaints. All of us. Sarah isn't just a troubled family member anymore, Mom. She's a criminal who's been systematically victimizing the people who love her. And if we don't stop her, she's going to do this to other families." For the first time in 2 years, my mother nodded in agreement with something I'd said about Sarah. "Okay," she said quietly. "Tell me what you need me to do." Over the next week, our family went through a crash course in filing police reports, disputing fraudulent accounts, and working with financial crimes investigators. Rachel had been right about everything. As more family members came forward with evidence of identity theft, the total amount of Sarah's crimes climbed toward $200,000. But Sarah seemed to have vanished completely. Her cell phone went straight to voicemail. Her social media accounts were deactivated. The address she'd been using for some of the fraudulent accounts turned out to be a mailbox service that required no identification to rent. She's had this planned for a while, Rachel told us during a meeting at the police station. People don't just disappear overnight without preparation. She's been setting up her exit strategy for months. Dad had been released from the hospital after 2 days, and the doctor confirmed that his chest pains were stress-related rather than cardiac damage. But the experience had shaken him deeply. For the first time in his life, he was seeing Sarah's behavior clearly, instead of through the lens of parental protection. I keep thinking about all the times she came to us with stories about Linus being unreasonable, he told me one evening as we sat in his living room. She made us believe you were the problem, and we fell for it completely. Dad, you were trying to help someone you thought was struggling. There's nothing wrong with wanting to support your child. But there's something wrong with supporting criminal behavior, he said firmly. And that's what we were doing. We weren't helping Sarah grow and learn from her mistakes. We were enabling her to keep making bigger and bigger mistakes. On New Year's Day, exactly a week after Sarah's disappearance, Rachel called with news. We found her, she said. She's at the Tijuana border crossing, trying to enter Mexico with a fake passport. Emma and I were at my parents' house, helping them sort through financial documents and insurance claims. When I told them about Rachel's call, Mom actually looked relieved. Thank God, she said. I've been so worried she was going to hurt herself or get hurt by someone else. 3 hours later, Rachel called back with an update. She's in federal custody, and Linus, this is bigger than we thought. How much bigger? Sarah wasn't just stealing from your family. The fake passport was one of 6 different identities she was carrying. She had cash totaling just over $200,000, plus jewelry and electronics that appear to be stolen from multiple sources. And she wasn't alone. My stomach dropped. Tyler Patterson was with her. He's also in custody, and he's already started talking. Apparently, Sarah's been using the construction company as a front for a much larger operation. They've been targeting elderly people across Colorado and Wyoming, using family connections to gather personal information for identity theft. Emma grabbed my hand. How many victims? We're still counting, but the preliminary estimate is over 30 people. Sarah would identify potential targets through social media, family connections, or community events. Tyler would verify employment for loan applications and provide fake business references. They've been running this operation for at least 18 months. The scope of what Rachel was describing felt overwhelming. Sarah wasn't just a troubled family member who'd made bad choices. She was a predator who'd been systematically targeting vulnerable people. What happens now? I asked. Federal arraignment is tomorrow morning. Given the amount of money involved and the interstate nature of the crimes, she's looking at serious prison time. The U.S. Attorney's Office is treating this as a major financial crimes case. That evening, the local news ran a story about Sarah's arrest. They showed her mugshot and described her as the leader of an identity theft ring that had victimized dozens of people across multiple states. They mentioned Tyler Patterson as her accomplice and showed footage of their arrest at the border. Watching my sister on the news as a criminal suspect felt surreal. Part of me had been hoping that somehow this would all turn out to be a misunderstanding, that Sarah would come home and explain everything, and we could go back to being a normal family. But seeing the evidence laid out by professional investigators made it impossible to maintain that fantasy. Sarah had been deliberately and systematically victimizing innocent people, including her own family members. The cash she'd been carrying at the border represented real money, stolen from real people who trusted her. My phone started ringing with calls from extended family members and family friends who'd seen the news. Some were supportive, telling me how brave I was for turning in my own sister. Others were critical, suggesting that family business should stay within the family and that I'd ruined Sarah's life over money. The criticism stung, but Emma helped put it in perspective. Those people don't know what Sarah was really doing, she said. They don't know about the elderly victims or the scope of the crimes. They're reacting to the idea of turning in family, not the reality of stopping a criminal enterprise. 3 days later, we attended Sarah's federal court hearing. She appeared in an orange jumpsuit, shackled at the wrists and ankles, looking smaller and younger than I remembered. When she saw our family in the courtroom, her expression shifted from defiance to something that might have been shame. The prosecutor outlined the charges: 18 counts of identity theft, 12 counts of wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and crossing state lines with the proceeds of criminal activity. If convicted on all counts, Sarah faced up to 25 years in federal prison. Tyler Patterson's hearing was scheduled for the same day. Unlike Sarah, he had accepted a plea deal in exchange for testifying against her and providing information about their victims. His cooperation had helped investigators identify dozens of people who didn't even know they'd been targeted. When the judge asked Sarah how she pleaded, she looked directly at me before answering. "Not guilty," she said quietly. After the hearing, Mom and Dad were quiet during the drive home. Finally, Dad spoke up. "She looked right at you when she entered her plea," he said, "like she was blaming you for being here." "She probably is blaming me," I replied. "Sarah's never taken responsibility for her choices. Why would she start now?" "But you did the right thing," Mom said firmly. "I know it doesn't feel good, and I know it's going to be hard to live with, but you did the right thing." That night, Emma and I sat in our kitchen, talking about the future. In 5 months, we'd be parents. Our child would grow up knowing that sometimes the right choice is also the hardest choice, and that protecting innocent people matters more than maintaining comfortable relationships. "Are you okay?" Emma asked, noticing that I'd been quiet for a while. "I keep thinking about something Rachel said, about how financial criminals usually escalate over time. If we hadn't stopped Sarah now, how many more people would she have hurt?" Emma rubbed her growing belly thoughtfully. "Your baby is going to be proud of you someday for choosing justice over family loyalty. That's a lesson worth learning early." I reached over and put my hand on her stomach, feeling the slight roundness that would be our daughter in a few months. I want her to understand that real love means holding people accountable when they hurt others. That helping someone sometimes means refusing to enable their worst behavior. "She will," Emma said confidently, "because you're going to teach her by example." 2 weeks later, Rachel called with Sarah's final sentencing information. She had accepted a plea deal for 8 years in federal prison and full restitution to all victims. Tyler Patterson received 5 years for his cooperation. The money our family had lost would be recovered through asset forfeiture and insurance claims. Aunt Helen's retirement savings would be restored. Cousin Derek's credit would be repaired. Uncle Thomas wouldn't have to worry about motorcycle loans he'd never taken. But more importantly, 37 elderly strangers across Colorado and Wyoming wouldn't have to worry about Sarah targeting them for future crimes. Justice had been served. 6 months later, I stood in the delivery room at Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital, holding my daughter, Grace, for the first time. She was perfect, tiny fingers, dark hair like Emma's, and eyes that seemed to look right through me with an old soul's wisdom. Emma was exhausted but glowing, still catching her breath from 8 hours of labor. "She's beautiful," she whispered, reaching up to touch Grace's cheek. "She's perfect," I agreed, feeling a love so fierce it took my breath away. This tiny person would never have to wonder if her family would protect her or exploit her. She'd grow up understanding that love means wanting the best for someone, even when that means setting difficult boundaries. Mom and Dad arrived an hour later, bringing flowers and tears of joy. Dad held Grace with the gentle confidence of someone who'd raised 2 children before, but his expression was different this time. More grateful, more aware of how precious these moments were. "She looks like you did as a baby," Mom said, stroking Grace's tiny hand. Same serious expression, like she's already thinking deep thoughts. Over the past 6 months, my relationship with my parents had slowly healed. They'd started therapy to address their enabling patterns and had made genuine efforts to understand how their behavior had affected both Sarah and me. Dad had even written me a letter apologizing for threatening to disinherit me and acknowledging that I'd been trying to protect the family from someone who was hurting all of us. The legal proceedings with Sarah had concluded 3 months earlier. She was serving her sentence at a federal facility in Oklahoma. According to the prison counselor, she was finally participating in therapy programs designed to help inmates understand the impact of their crimes on victims. Tyler Patterson had been released after 18 months and was working construction again, this time legitimately. He'd written letters of apology to all the victims he could identify and was making monthly restitution payments as part of his probation agreement. Emma had purchased another investment property with the money recovered from Sarah's crimes, and we were planning to move into a larger house before Grace turned 1. We'd gotten married in a small ceremony in Emma's parents' backyard, with Grace kicking actively throughout the vows as if she approved of our commitment to each other. "Have you heard anything from Sarah recently?" Mom asked as she settled into the hospital chair next to Emma's bed. I shook my head. The prison counselor sends quarterly updates to victims' families, but Sarah hasn't requested any direct contact with us. I think that's probably for the best right now. "Maybe someday she'll be ready to make real amends," Dad said hopefully. "Maybe," I agreed. "But if that day comes, it has to be because she's genuinely changed, not because she wants something from us. Grace is going to grow up understanding the difference between forgiveness and foolishness." Emma smiled at that. "Speaking of Grace growing up, we should probably think about godparents." I was hoping we. And you respond with cruelty and dismissal. You don't deserve their continued love. We learned that we nearly lost the most generous, caring person in our family because we were too proud and stupid to appreciate him. "Mom, let me finish, honey." We also learned that what happened with Bradley wasn't just theft. It was a symptom of our family's dysfunction. We were so eager to believe in easy solutions and magical windfalls that we never questioned obvious lies. We were so comfortable with unearned benefits that we never wondered where they really came from. We created an environment where someone like Bradley could manipulate us because we wanted to believe we were successful without effort. I found myself genuinely impressed by her self-reflection. What happened to Bradley? He was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. His wife divorced him, and he lost everything. But Nick, I need you to know that we don't see him as the villain in this story. We see ourselves as the villains. Bradley took advantage of our greed and laziness, but we created the conditions that made his crimes possible. That's a mature way to look at it. The counselor helped us understand that we were living in a fantasy world where we deserved success without effort, where we could treat people badly without consequences, and where someone would always rescue us from our poor choices. Bradley didn't create that fantasy. He just profited from it. And now we're learning to live in the real world. Your father gets up at 5 in the morning to work in a warehouse, and he's proud of the paycheck he earns. I'm learning bookkeeping skills so I can advance at the community center. Emma is discovering that paying for her own education makes her value it more than when she thought it was free. That sounds like positive growth. It is. But Nick, the most important thing we've learned is that we lost something precious when we lost your trust and respect. We had a son who loved us enough to work himself exhausted to keep us comfortable, and we repaid that love with contempt and cruelty. I could hear her crying softly now. We know we can't undo what we did. We know we can't take back the things we said or the way we treated you. But we're hoping that maybe someday we can earn the right to be your family again. Not your dependents or your responsibilities, but your family. What would that look like, Mom? It would look like us proving that we've changed, that we can be supportive, grateful people who appreciate what we have and treat each other with kindness. It would look like us building a relationship based on love and respect instead of need and entitlement. And if I'm not ready for that, then we'll wait. We'll keep working on ourselves, keep growing as people, and hope that someday you'll see that we're worth a second chance. But Nick, we won't pressure you, and we won't expect anything. We've learned that love and trust have to be earned, not demanded. What about Emma and Dad? They're both committed to making amends. Emma wrote you a letter that she's been too nervous to send. Your father has been attending a support group for people who've damaged family relationships through pride and selfishness. A support group for that exists. Apparently, we weren't the only family who nearly destroyed themselves through ingratitude and entitlement. The counselor says it's more common than people think. We arranged to meet the following Saturday at a neutral coffee shop downtown. When I arrived, I found my family already seated at a corner table, looking nervous but determined. They looked different. My father had lost weight and appeared younger somehow, despite being dressed in work clothes instead of the expensive casual wear I had been buying him. My mother looked tired, but alert, engaged in a way I hadn't seen in years. Emma seemed more mature, more focused, less entitled than the college student who had criticized my financial irresponsibility. The conversation was awkward at first, but gradually became more natural as we talked about their new lives, their challenges, and their discoveries about themselves. They didn't make excuses or try to minimize their behavior. They acknowledged the full extent of their cruelty and ingratitude without trying to deflect blame. More importantly, they shared what they had learned about appreciating what they had, supporting each other through difficulties, and building relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. Nick, Emma said toward the end of our conversation, her voice still a little shaky, I need you to know that I understand now what you sacrificed for us. I'm paying my own tuition by working 40 hours a week while taking classes full-time. It's exhausting and stressful, and it makes me realize how much work you must have done to fund my education while I criticized you for not being successful enough. I also understand, my father added, his gaze meeting mine, what it must have felt like to watch us enjoy a comfortable lifestyle while calling you a failure. To work 16-hour days so we could live well, while we lectured you about responsibility and effort. But I understand, my mother concluded, her eyes filled with a deep, quiet understanding. What it must have felt like to love people who didn't appreciate your love, to sacrifice for people who took your sacrifice for granted, to protect people who couldn't even see that they needed protection. Over the following months, we began rebuilding our relationships, slowly and carefully. They didn't ask for money or assistance, but they did ask for my advice, my company, and my perspective on their new challenges. They shared their successes and failures honestly, without trying to impress me or hide their struggles. Most importantly, they demonstrated through their actions that they had fundamentally changed their approach to family relationships. They supported each other through difficulties without expecting someone else to solve their problems. They celebrated each other's achievements without feeling entitled to share in the benefits. They treated each other with kindness and respect, even when stressed or frustrated. A year after that first coffee meeting, I helped my father move into a small house he had saved up to buy, not by giving him money, but by providing advice on inspections and negotiations. I attended Emma's graduation from community college, where she had earned a degree in accounting while working full-time. I celebrated my mother's promotion to office manager at the community center, a position she had earned through dedication and skill development. And gradually, I began to trust that they had learned the most important lesson of all, that family relationships are built on mutual love, respect, and appreciation, not on financial obligation or dependency. The experience taught me something valuable, too. I learned that protecting people from the consequences of their choices doesn't actually protect them at all. It enables them to remain immature, selfish, and ungrateful. Real love sometimes requires allowing people to struggle and learn and grow, even when watching them struggle is painful. I learned that generosity without boundaries becomes enabling, that sacrifice without acknowledgement becomes martyrdom, and that love without respect becomes exploitation. Most importantly, I learned that the people who truly deserve your support are those who appreciate it, reciprocate it, and never take it for granted. My family learned to become those people, and our relationship today is stronger and more genuine than it ever was when I was secretly funding their comfortable illusions. So, I have a question for everyone listening to this story. Have you ever found yourself supporting someone who took your generosity for granted? Someone who criticized you while benefiting from your kindness? How did you handle that situation? Did you set boundaries? Or did you continue enabling their behavior? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. And if this story helped you think about your own family relationships or financial boundaries in a new way, please give it a like and subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself while keeping your heart open to the people who prove they deserve your trust. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that your generosity is valuable and should be appreciated, that your kindness deserves to be reciprocated, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is allow people to learn from their own mistakes. Remember, true family isn't about obligation or dependency. It's about mutual love, respect, and support. Don't settle for anything less. Share this story with someone who might need to hear it. And remember that you deserve to be appreciated for the love and support you give to others. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.